With all the latest leaks and rumors that have been coming out, I am now 100% sure that Apple will be revealing the new budget iPad 9 at their September event alongside the new iPhones. So in this video, I'm gonna go through the history of leaks for the iPad 9 and explain why I'm so confident in that date, and then I'm gonna go through the list of specs that should be coming on this iPad and explain why they also make the most sense. So without further ado, let's get right into it. First up, just by looking at Apple's iPad release timeline, you can see that for the last 4 years, Apple's released a new budget iPad every year without missing a single year, and they're expected to continue this trend this time again. And if you take a closer look, Apple's budget iPads usually get released in either March or September alongside the iPhone, and since we're already into the summer without a new iPad 9, it's gonna have to be released in September no matter what. In fact, the last 2 budget iPad models were revealed at Apple's iPhone event. And in terms of the date of the event itself, it almost always happens on a Tuesday, and usually the second Tuesday of the month, like they did the last couple of years. So that points to September 14th for this year's event, and that's when we're expecting the iPad 9 reveal. But now, getting back to the iPad 9 leaks and the actual specs themselves, the most important thing to understand is that the budget iPad usually gets updated on a tick-tock cycle, so let me explain how that worked in the past. In 2017, Apple released the iPad 5 with a 9.7-inch display and the Apple A9 chip. And then the following year, they released the iPad 6 with the same exact 9.7-inch display, but they upgraded the chip to the A10. The year after that, in 2019, they updated the design and gave it a 10.2-inch display size, but they kept the chip the same A10 as it was before. Now that was definitely a bit of a disappointing upgrade because the new iPhone 11 was released alongside the iPad, but it came with an A13 chip, 3 generations newer. But Apple still went with the A10 for the budget iPad. And just last year, they gave us the iPad 8 with the same 10.2-inch display design, but they bumped up the chip to the A12, which means that they skipped the A11. So as you can see, the tick-tock cycle works by upgrading the design and display 1 year, and then upgrading the chip the next year. So if Apple were to continue this cycle this year, we should actually expect Apple to update the design, but keep the same A12 chip as it currently has, which would definitely be disappointing like it was in 2019, but it shouldn't really be that surprising if it ends up happening. But going back to the oldest leaks we have on the iPad 9, the Twitter leaker named 000 Leaker mentioned that Ming-Chi Kuo expects a new low-priced iPad in the second half of 2021, with one of the prototypes being the same design as the iPad Air 3. Now I totally agree with this because Apple tends to reuse their higher-end iPad designs for their lower-end iPads. For example, the 2017 iPad Pro came with a 10.5-inch display size for the base model and the older chamfered edge design. And then in 2018, the iPad Pro was upgraded to the new modern flat edge design with rounded corners on the display. And then in 2019, the iPad Air 3 adopted basically the same identical 10.5-inch design that the iPad Pro used to have. And then finally, in late 2020, the iPad Air 4 ended up adopting the 2018 iPad Pro design with the modern flat edges and new display. So because of that, it would totally make sense for the iPad 9 to adopt that old 10.5-inch display design as well, since it's going to be very easy for Apple to manufacture. However, there are some new leaks that just came out that point to Apple keeping the same 10.2-inch display again for the 3rd year in a row, which would be a bit weird, but I'll get into those reports in just a minute. Now, some people are hoping for the budget iPad to also get a full redesign to match up with the modern iPads, complete with flat edges, no home button, and a rounded corner display. But I honestly don't think that's gonna happen because the iPad is always behind in terms of the feature set, obviously because of the very cheap $329 base price. For example, the current budget iPad still doesn't have a laminated display, it still doesn't support PCI 3 wide color gamut, it still only has a 1.2 megapixel selfie camera, it still only has Bluetooth 4.2, and it still only comes with 32 gigs of storage at the base price. So I expect the budget iPad to be the very last iPad to adapt the modern full screen design, probably at at least a full year after the iPad mini gets the new design, which is rumored to be happening this fall. Now, getting back to the iPad 9 leaks, in December, CN Beta reported that the new iPad would be coming in spring of 2021, which was obviously wrong, but they mentioned that it would be getting a 10.5-inch display, which I can definitely see happening, and an A13 chip with 4 gigs of RAM. So basically what they're saying is that Apple is gonna break the TikTok cycle by updating both the display and the chip at the same time, which I think might be a possibility, but in reality, the A12 chip is already very fast for what you're paying for. The current budget iPad with the A12 was the very first budget iPad that was actually quite good at gaming, playing all of the best iOS games out there with ease, so Apple could easily keep the A12 again. And for this upcoming new iPad 9, I'm totally expecting it to get a fully laminated display and support for DCI P3 color gamut, which is actually going to be a huge deal, and it's going to make this iPad a much better value. On top of that, I'm expecting some of the other specs to get bumped up as well, like Bluetooth 5.0 and a 7-megapixel selfie camera. So even if Apple keeps the same A12 chip, it'll still be a decent upgrade in terms of the larger, thinner design and display quality. And in that case, the following iPad update next year could skip the A13 and go straight for the A14 chip without a design change like they did in 2019. And then 2 years from now, they could finally give the budget iPad the full modern redesign with uniform bezels, but keep the same A14 chip. Now that might seem like a ridiculously long time to wait for the full modern redesign, but it would perfectly match up to Apple's TikTok cycle, and you also have to keep in mind that this is the budget iPad that we're talking about. So in the case that this scenario ends up happening, here is my full feature and spec list that I'm predicting with a $329 base price, just like the current model, with 32 gigs of storage and 3 gigabytes of RAM with the A12 chip. However, the only problem I have with this scenario is that we got a couple of reports recently that point to the iPad 9 actually not getting an upgraded 10.5-inch display. Mark Gurman, the most reliable leaker out there, said last month that the iPad 9 would be a thinner version of the current base iPad, which will continue to be targeted to students. On top of that, Mac Otakara released a report just yesterday saying that the iPad 9 does not seem to be any different than the existing model. So what if the iPad 9 actually sticks to the same 10.2-inch display, but becomes thinner than the current one? Well, that could actually make a lot of sense because the current iPad's non-laminated display actually increases the thickness by quite a lot. So simply swapping it out for a new laminated 10.2-inch display would make it quite a lot thinner, and it would match up to Mark Gurman's report. And if this does happen, that would also break the TikTok cycle of not giving it a new design. And that would mean that we should expect this iPad 9 to actually get the A13 chip, like others have been reporting, and I would much rather have that than a 10.5-inch display. And then that would mean that the full modern redesign with rounded corners on the display could actually come next year, which would make a ton of sense since it's going to be the 10th generation iPad, which is perfect for a new redesign. And if this second scenario plays out, here is my alternative list of specs and features, complete with a 10.2-inch laminated display, the A13 chip with 4 gigs of RAM, but probably still a $329 starting price with 32 gigs of base storage. But anyway, those are the latest leaks and rumors on the iPad 9, including my personal thoughts on the features and the specs. And if you totally disagree with me, then go ahead and leave your comments and thoughts down below. But if you enjoyed the video, go ahead and tap the like button and click the circle above to subscribe for more videos like this one. Definitely check out one of those two right there. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.